I saw my wife's silver Lexus at my son-in-law's gate, instantly realizing the work documents my daughter mentioned were 43 minutes of my wife and her husband planning to steal $20 million. They called me an old fool, but they failed to realize the man who built an empire doesn't play checkers when the game is chess. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. I saw my wife's shiny silver Lexus parked brazenly in my son-in-law's driveway, and the world narrowed to a pinprick of cold fear. My heart clenched instantly. That car should have been in our garage. I cut the engine on my Honda, the keys still dangling from the ignition. 5 minutes earlier, I'd called my daughter Aurora to surprise her with dinner plans. "Sorry, Dad, I'm not home," she'd said cheerfully, "but Scott's there working on some case files." Now, with the October crispness biting at my neck, I knew that was a lie. Something was terribly wrong. My legs trembled as I approached the half-open window, trying not to give myself away. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see them both. Vivian, my wife of 25 years, was lounging on my daughter's couch like she owned the place. My son-in-law, Scott, leaned against the bookshelf with that smug expression I'd grown to despise. Then I heard Vivian's voice. It drifted through the window like poison in my veins. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." My blood ran cold. I sat frozen against the brick wall, sweat beading despite the chill. Scott, his lawyer voice crisp with satisfaction, delivered the next line. "The timeline's perfect," he said. "File in December, claim irreconcilable differences." He was talking about divorce. My divorce. With the new statutes, Vivian's entitled to half of everything acquired during marriage, plus spousal support for life. Vivian laughed. That tinkling sound I'd once found charming was now a knife twist. Donovan Builders alone is worth $12 million. She examined her manicured nails. Add the rental properties, the vacation home, investments. We're looking at nearly $20 million total. My hands shook, but I fumbled for my phone and hit record. This venom needed a witness. Scott was still speaking, laying out his strategy with contemptuous ease. The beautiful part is his trusting nature. Donovan has no idea we've been documenting his assets for months. Bank statements, property deeds, business valuations, everything was already copied. He gestured toward a manila folder on the coffee table. He practically handed us the keys to his kingdom. 2 years of playing the devoted wife, Vivian scoffed, her voice thick with disgust, pretending to care about his boring construction stories, nodding sympathetically when he worried about payroll. God, the man actually believes I love him. A twig snapped under my foot. The sound was a pistol shot in the silence. Both of them froze mid-conversation, heads turning toward the window like startled deer. I pressed myself flat against the rough brick. "Did you hear something?" Vivian's voice was sharp with suspicion. "Probably just the neighbor's cat," Scott replied after a long pause. "You're paranoid. Can you blame me if Donovan discovered this before we're ready?" Scott laughed again, a sound devoid of warmth. "He won't. The man couldn't spot a conspiracy if it wore a neon sign. He promised her freedom and wealth by March." I forced myself to stay hidden until their conversation resumed. My phone captured every poisonous word. When I finally crept back to my car 15 minutes later, my world had violently shifted on its axis. 2 years of preparation, months of documentation, 25 years of marriage reduced to a financial strategy session between my wife and my son-in-law. I sat in the driver's seat, hands wrapped around the steering wheel. These were the hands that had built Donovan Builders from nothing. The front door opened just as I reached for the ignition. Vivian emerged first, her designer handbag swinging casually. Scott followed, adjusting his tie with practiced precision. Neither expected to find me sitting in my Honda. The shock registered on Vivian's face like a slap. "Donovan!" Her voice climbed an octave. "What are you doing here?" I climbed out of the car, forcing my face into something resembling normal. My pulse hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat. 25 years of marriage had taught me to read her moods, but now I knew she'd been acting the entire time. "Just finished a job site inspection nearby," I lied smoothly, Thought I'd stop by and see Aurora. Scott stepped protectively closer to Vivian. His pale gray eyes studied my face with uncomfortable intensity, searching for cracks in my story. "She's not here," Vivian said quickly. "I was just helping Scott organize some legal documents for a client." The lie rolled off her tongue with practiced ease. I kept my voice light. "Oh, I thought you'd be at work until 6 o'clock today. Didn't you mention the Harrington proposal this morning?" A flicker of panic crossed her features. "I left early. Headache." "Sorry to hear that." I turned to Scott with manufactured friendliness. "Working on an interesting case." "Asset division," he replied without thinking. Then he caught himself. "For a divorce client, very complex financial situation." The irony was a punch to the gut. Vivian's eyes darted between us. "How long have you been here, Donovan?" "Just pulled up." "Why?" "No reason," but her smile looked painted on. Scott let his hand settle possessively on Vivian's lower back. The gesture was automatic, intimate. How long had that been happening? "Good timing, then." I pulled out my phone to check the time, making sure they both saw the device. Scott's eyes lingered on the screen. "I should head home anyway. Dinner won't cook itself." "I'll be along shortly," Vivian said, her laugh forced. "Just need to wrap up a few things here. Take your time." I opened my car door, then paused, as if remembering something. "Oh, Vivian. Dr. Nelson's office called about rescheduling your physical. Something about a conflict with your work schedule." Her face went blank for a split second, the look of someone whose lie had been exposed. She recovered with impressive speed. "Must be a mix-up. I'll call them later." I slid into the driver's seat, my heart hammering. "See you both later." As I backed out of the driveway, I watched them in my rearview mirror. They stood frozen until my car disappeared around the corner. Then, they immediately moved closer together, heads bent in urgent conversation. The dance of deception was complete. They suspected I'd overheard something. I knew they were planning to destroy me. And all of us were pretending everything was perfectly normal. Vivian would drive home, armed with explanations for her early departure and her presence at Scott's house. But she didn't know about the recording on my phone. 43 minutes of crystal clear audio that would change everything. I pulled into traffic, hands steady on the wheel for the first time in an hour. The shock had worn off, replaced by something colder and more focused. They thought they were playing chess with a checkers player. My Honda found its way into our circular driveway without conscious direction. I sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the house I'd built with my own hands back in 1995. Every board, every nail, every detail had been a love letter to the woman who was now plotting to steal it. The front door opened into a silence that felt different now. Not peaceful, but hollow. Vivian's recorded voice echoed in my memory. "The man actually believes I love him. The worst part, until 30 minutes ago, I absolutely did." The wedding photo on the mantle caught my eye first. June 15, 1989. Vivian, radiant in ivory silk. Me, awkward in a rented tuxedo. Both of us glowing with what I'd believed was genuine happiness. I was 37, and Donovan Builders was finally turning a real profit. She was 22, working as a secretary downtown. She had listened with genuine interest on our first date as I described my dreams of building something lasting. "You're not just building structures," she'd said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "You're building homes." I'd proposed 6 months later. Now, the 25th anniversary card sat on the kitchen table. "To my wonderful husband, thank you for making all my dreams come true. All her love." The phrase tasted bitter. I moved to the living room where Aurora's baby pictures lined the built-in shelves I'd crafted. June 8, 1995, the day our daughter was born. Those first years had been the happiest of my life. I sank into my leather recliner, the one Vivian always complained was too ugly for the formal living room. When had gratitude transformed into entitlement? When had thank you for providing this life become, we deserve so much more? The recording held the answer. Vivian hadn't loved me in years, possibly decades. Every kiss, every anniversary celebration, every I love you had been calculated. Manipulation designed to keep me working, earning, building wealth she could eventually claim as her own. I sat in the growing darkness, and something cold and analytical settled over the grief. Vivian thought she was playing the long game. She had no idea her husband possessed the same strategic mind that had built a construction empire from nothing. The game was about to change. I forced myself to think like the businessman I'd always been. When had Vivian's behavior shifted from genuine partnership to calculated positioning? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. October 2021, when Donovan Builders landed the Stone Community Center contract, $50 million over 3 years, the largest project in company history. I'd come home that October evening expecting celebration, maybe champagne. Instead, Vivian had been sitting at the kitchen table with a real estate magazine and a calculator. "This means we can finally afford the house on Elm Street," she'd announced without looking up. "The Hendersons are asking $4.2 million. Not congratulations on the achievement, just immediate focus on what my success could buy her." "Vivian, I haven't even started the project yet," I'd said. "There's design work, permits, subcontractor negotiations." "But the money is guaranteed, right?" She finally looked at me, her green eyes calculating. "I mean, once you sign the contract, the city has to pay." The conversation had lasted 2 hours. She'd mapped out expenditures down to the last detail. The new house, country club membership, luxury cars, European vacations. Hers, not ours. The pronouns had been telling, though I'd been too focused to notice. By October 2022, the demands had escalated. Our perfectly adequate vacation cabin in the north became embarrassing compared to the Johnsons' place in the mountains. Vivian began dropping hints about other wives whose husbands really understood how to treat a woman. Physical intimacy disappeared gradually. Separate bedrooms became necessary because of my snoring, though she had never complained in 23 years. Dinner conversations shifted to Vivian's detailed accounts of what other families owned. Sarah Mitchell's husband bought her a Mercedes for their anniversary. The friendship with Scott had intensified after Aurora's wedding in March 2025. Suddenly, Vivian was fascinated by legal proceedings, asking hypothetical questions about property division for a friend. She started receiving calls that sent her to the other room. I pulled out my phone and replayed segments of the recording. We've been documenting his assets for months, 25 years of playing the devoted wife. The documentation made sense now. Vivian's sudden interest in my financial reports, her questions about business valuations, her insistence on joint accounts while maintaining her own separate credit cards. She'd been conducting reconnaissance. But Vivian had made a crucial error. She'd underestimated the man who'd built Donovan Builders from a single truck. The same analytical mind that had navigated 35 years of construction projects was now focused on a different kind of problem. They thought they were playing chess with someone who didn't know the rules. I stood up from the recliner and walked to my home office. Tax returns, contracts, property deeds, everything Vivian thought she'd been secretly documenting. But I knew something she didn't. The real assets weren't in those files. I reached for my phone and scrolled until I found the number I needed. Calvin Hayes, my accountant, my friend, and the only person who knew about the offshore arrangements I'd established years ago for tax optimization purposes. Time to make a call that would change everything. 3 days of methodical research had transformed my home office into a war room. 2 laptops hummed quietly on the mahogany desk I'd built. Their screens displayed bank statements, legal databases, and property records. Yellow legal pads covered every surface with columns labeled leverage points and weaknesses. I'd shaved carefully that morning, put on my best navy suit. Grief had crystallized into strategy. Calvin Hayes had been more helpful than I dared hope. 3 offshore accounts, completely legal, fully documented, but invisible to anyone without forensic accounting skills. Vivian's amateur reconnaissance mission had missed the real treasure. She'd been cataloging the visible kingdom while the crown jewels remained hidden in plain sight. But Vivian had been busy too. Her credit card statements told a fascinating story. $47,000 in unauthorized transfers over 8 months, funneled to a joint savings account I'd never opened. The beneficiary name made my jaw clench. Daniel Thompson, Scott. They'd been positioning themselves as financial partners long before their divorce conspiracy began. $300 spa treatments, luxury lunches at lakeside cliffs, designer clothing. Every expense painted a picture of a woman preparing for a different life. The Hermes handbag she'd bought last Tuesday carried a particular irony, given she'd complained about grocery costs just that morning. Scott's vulnerabilities proved even more illuminating. My construction industry contacts had been generous with information. The man who planned to steal my fortune was drowning in debt. $180,000 in student loans, an $8,500 monthly office lease. Thompson's a sharp lawyer, Gary Stone from Stone Concrete had told me over coffee, but he's got champagne tastes on a beer budget, owes 3 of my subcontractors nearly 25 grand total. He always promised payment next week, then disappeared. The State Bar Association's website revealed 2 dismissed ethical complaints in the past year. Both involved client fund mismanagement. Dismissed, but documented. I leaned back in my leather chair, surveying the intelligence gathered. Vivian and Scott had underestimated their opponent catastrophically. They'd failed to recognize the analytical mind that had built Donovan Builders into a $12 million enterprise. The phone rang, jarring me from my strategy. Aurora's name flashed on the screen. "Hey, sweetheart." I kept my voice warm, normal. "How's your day going?" "Dad, I need to ask you something." Her tone carried the careful neutrality she used with troubled patience. "Is everything okay between you and Mom lately?" My hand tightened on the phone. How much did she know? "What makes you ask?" "Little things. Mom seems stressed about money, which is strange since business has been so good." My pulse spiked. "And Scott keeps asking weird questions about your company structure, like how the partnerships work and who controls what assets." She paused. "It feels like they're fishing for information, but I can't figure out why." Fishing for information. My daughter's psychology training had detected the predatory behavior they thought they'd hidden. "Probably just curiosity about how the business world works," I said carefully. "Your mom's always been interested in financial security." "Maybe." But Aurora didn't sound convinced. "Dad, if something was wrong, I mean really wrong, you'd tell me, right?" The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. "Tell her what?" "That her mother and husband were orchestrating a conspiracy to destroy me financially?" "Of course, sweetheart, but everything's fine. Just the usual business pressures." After we hung up, I sat staring at my research notes. Scott had been pumping my daughter for information about my business structure. The scope of their intelligence gathering was broader than I'd realized. Time to make sure they got exactly the information I wanted them to have. My secure phone line rang. Maria Santos, my accountant for 12 years. "Donovan, I've got the asset protection documents ready for signature. When you mentioned wanting to update estate planning, I took the liberty of researching optimal structures." A pause. "This is about more than estate planning, isn't it?" How perceptive of you. 28 years in forensic accounting teaches you to read between the lines, Maria said. "I'll have everything ready by noon." The business assets will be completely insulated from any personal legal action. Whoever's planning to take a run at your personal finances won't even see the real money. By 10 a.m., I was sitting across from Bill Foster, president of First National Bank, and my golf partner for 15 years. "Account security review," I said, sliding documents across the polished table. "I need all joint access points verified and temporarily frozen pending identity confirmation." Bill's eyebrows rose slightly. "This is comprehensive, Donovan. Every joint account, credit line, and automatic payment system. Every single one." I smiled when I said it. "How long for the security holds to take effect?" "Immediately upon your signature. All account holders will receive notification that access requires in-person verification with photo ID." Bill studied my face. "This is going to inconvenience Vivian significantly." I signed the stack of papers. "I'm counting on it." The security holds activated at 11:47 a.m. Vivian was likely sitting down for her weekly lunch at Lakeside Cliffs with 3 other construction wives. I was reviewing contractor bids when my phone buzzed with the first declined transaction at 12:03 p.m. Vivian's panicked call came at 12:50 p.m. Donovan, something's wrong with our accounts. My card was declined at lunch, and when I called the bank, they said there's a security hold. Do you know anything about this? Perfect innocence. No mention of the joint account with Scott's name. No acknowledgement of the missing $47,000. Security hold? That sounds serious, I said, feigning concern. Did they say what triggered it? Something about verifying identity and account access. It's embarrassing, Donovan. I'm sitting here with Linda and Susan and Janet, and I can't even pay for my own lunch. The distress in her voice was genuine, not because her conspiracy was threatened, but because her social status had been publicly compromised. After 25 years, I knew Vivian's priorities. I'll call Bill Foster immediately, I assured her. We'll get this sorted out. But I didn't call Bill. Instead, I drove to the construction site where my crew was pouring foundation for the new medical center. The familiar sounds of machinery and worker voices felt grounding after 3 days of financial warfare. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the afternoon. Vivian, 1:47 p.m. Still can't access any accounts. This is ridiculous. Vivian, 2:23 p.m. Bill Foster's secretary says he's in meetings all day. What kind of bank president is too busy for his best customers? Vivian, 3:15 p.m. Even our emergency credit line is frozen. How am I supposed to buy groceries? Each message brought a grim satisfaction. For 25 years, Vivian had taken financial security for granted. Now, she was experiencing what it felt like when that security vanished without warning. Scott's reaction proved even more interesting. At 4:30 p.m., my private investigator, Frank Ramirez, called with an update. Thompson tried to access his shared account with your wife 3 times this afternoon, Frank said. When that failed, he attempted to withdraw funds from what appears to be a trust account, probably your daughter's education fund that he manages. That one's frozen too, per your instructions. Frank described Scott's demeanor. Angry phone calls to bank reps, threats about legal action, demands to speak with management. Classic overconfident attorney discovering his leverage had evaporated. By 6 p.m., I was home, reviewing the day's financial battlefield from my office. Every shared account frozen, every joint credit line suspended. Vivian's access to 25 years of accumulated wealth had been reduced to whatever cash she carried in her purse. The security measures were completely legal, a husband protecting marital assets pending estate planning review. Bill Foster would confirm that standard banking protocols had been followed precisely, but Vivian and Scott would understand the message perfectly. The man they'd planned to financially ambush was no longer playing defense. My phone rang at 6:47 p.m. Vivian's number, but the voice that answered would be desperate now, not manipulative. Time to see how quickly conspirators turned on each other when their plans started crumbling. The after-hours security guard at Thompson & Associates barely looked up as Vivian rushed through the lobby at 7:15 p.m. Her heels clicked frantically on the marble floor. I knew this because Frank Ramirez had positioned himself in the coffee shop across the street with a clear view of the building entrance. The frantic call Vivian had made from our driveway had been loud enough for our next-door neighbor to overhear. "Scott, we need to talk immediately. Something's gone terribly wrong." On the 14th floor, Scott's corner office glowed with emergency session intensity. Through the window, anyone with binoculars could see 2 figures hunched over a conference table covered with documents. Their body language screamed, "Crisis management. He knows." Vivian's voice carried through the building's older ventilation system to an accounting firm office next door, where Frank's contact was listening. "Donovan knows something and he's cutting off everything. I couldn't even buy gas for my car." Scott's response was sharp, professional, his litigation voice engaged. "The timing isn't coincidental. 3 days ago you said he showed up unexpectedly at Aurora's house right when we were discussing strategy." He paused. He must have overheard something. How much could he have heard? Enough to understand we're not playing around. Papers rustled as Scott reviewed documents. "Vivian, we need to assume he recorded our conversation. Everything we said about assets, timeline, strategy, all of it potentially documented." The silence that followed spoke volumes. 2 conspirators realizing their victim had been several moves ahead. "What do we do?" Vivian's voice had lost its earlier confidence. We accelerate everything. No more gradual approach. No more careful positioning. Scott's voice was suddenly cold, driven. Monday morning, I file for emergency divorce proceedings with immediate spousal support of $15,000 monthly. We claim Donovan is engaging in financial abuse by restricting your access to marital assets. Financial abuse? That sounds legally compelling, Vivian said, her tone sharpening with interest. We paint him as a controlling husband who uses money to manipulate and intimidate, Scott finished. The frozen accounts become evidence of his abusive patterns, not a defensive strategy. More wrestling papers, the sound of a legal mind shifting into full attack mode. I'll need you to document instances of emotional abuse, financial control, intimidation tactics. Think back over your marriage. Anytime Donovan made financial decisions without consulting you, anytime he questioned your spending, anytime he used money to influence your behavior. That's going to be difficult, Scott. Donovan's never been controlling about money. If anything, he's been too generous. Then we reframe generosity as manipulation, Scott countered, his audacity breathtaking. His providing for you becomes evidence that he created financial dependency to maintain control. Every gift, every luxury, every comfortable lifestyle choice becomes proof of his systematic isolation strategy. They were planning to weaponize 25 years of my dedication, twisting every act of love into evidence of abuse. What about Aurora? Vivian asked. She's not going to automatically take my side. Her psychology training makes her skeptical of everything. That's actually perfect. Scott's voice carried the satisfaction of a man who'd found his closing argument. Aurora's hesitation to support you immediately becomes evidence of how thoroughly Donovan has manipulated family dynamics. We position her psychology training as something Donovan exploited to turn his own daughter against her mother's emotional needs. You want to make our daughter a witness against her father? Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. I want to save your financial future, Vivian. Aurora's professional training means her testimony carries extra weight. The plan was elegant in its comprehensive evil. Turn my daughter's professional skepticism into evidence against me. Reframe every act of love as manipulation. Transform defensive financial protection into proof of abuse. Monday morning, Scott continued, I file for emergency restraining orders preventing further asset movement, immediate spousal support of $15,000 monthly, and temporary exclusive occupancy of the marital home. By Wednesday, we'll have him painted as an abusive husband who needs court supervision to prevent further financial intimidation. And if he fights back, then we escalate. Harassment charges if he contacts you directly. Stalking allegations if he investigates our activities. Scott's voice carried cold satisfaction. The beauty of domestic abuse law is that denial becomes evidence of guilt. The harder he fights, the more controlling he appears. Vivian's laughter held no warmth. Poor Donovan. He has no idea what he's unleashed. They spent another hour coordinating their stories. The conspiracy had evolved from a simple asset grab to a character assassination campaign designed to destroy not just my finances, but my reputation, my relationship with my daughter, and my standing in the community. As Vivian finally left the building at 9:30 p.m., her phone was already buzzing. Scott's first strategic text. Remember, you're not an angry wife anymore. You're a terrified victim, finally finding courage to escape your abuser. The war had officially begun, and I had everything they said on tape. Saturday morning found Vivian and Aurora at Luna Cafe, the bistro where they'd shared monthly mother-daughter brunches for 5 years. Vivian had chosen their usual corner table, intimate and private, perfect for confidential conversations. This time, she positioned herself as a woman seeking professional help rather than maternal support. Aurora, I need to talk to you about your father, Vivian said, her voice carrying carefully calibrated vulnerability. I think something's wrong with him mentally. Aurora set down her coffee cup with the deliberate precision she used when shifting into therapist mode. What kind of wrong, Mom? Controlling behaviors, paranoid thinking. Vivian leaned forward, keeping her voice low. He's been restricting my access to our accounts, claiming it's for security reasons. She let her voice trail off, allowing her daughter's imagination to fill the blanks. How long has this been going on? Aurora asked. Months, maybe longer. I just attributed it to work stress. Vivian paused for effect. But yesterday he completely froze me out of every account we share. I couldn't even buy lunch. Aurora leaned forward, her psychological training engaged despite personal involvement. Mom, financial control can be a form of domestic abuse, but it can also be legitimate financial management during business transitions or legal concerns. She kept her face neutral. What's Dad's explanation? The question was too direct, too professionally neutral. Vivian had expected emotional support, not clinical analysis. He claims it's routine account security, but Aurora, I've been married to him for 25 years. This isn't routine. This is punishment for something. Punishment for what? Vivian hesitated. How much could she reveal without exposing her own conspiracy? I think he suspects I've been questioning our marriage. Maybe he's trying to intimidate me into staying. Mom. Aurora's voice carried the patience of someone who'd spent years treating manipulative patients. Are you telling me Dad is financially abusing you to prevent divorce? Or are you telling me you're considering divorce and Dad is protecting assets? The distinction cut too close to the truth. Vivian shifted tactics. I'm telling you that your father has been exhibiting concerning behavioral changes, and as a psychologist, I thought you might have insights about what's happening. As a psychologist, I'd say that major behavioral changes usually have identifiable triggers. Aurora was studying her mother with clinical detachment. What happened 3 days ago that might have caused Dad to suddenly restrict account access? Vivian's mind raced. Aurora was too well trained to accept emotional manipulation without evidence. I don't know what triggered it. That's what scares me. Mom, are you asking for psychological advice, or are you asking me to take sides in a marital conflict? The blunt question shattered Vivian's manipulation strategy. Her daughter wasn't providing the emotional validation she needed. I'm asking you to help me understand what's happening to our family. Then I suggest you have an honest conversation with Dad about his concerns, instead of asking me to psychoanalyze him based on your interpretation of his behavior. Vivian left the cafe 20 minutes later, furious at her daughter's professional detachment. If Aurora refused to automatically support her claims, the victim narrative would collapse under professional scrutiny. Meanwhile, 40 miles away at Donovan Builders' headquarters, I was receiving intelligence that would reshape the entire battlefield. Gary Stone's call came at 10:15 a.m., just as I was reviewing weekend job site reports. Donovan, thought you'd want to know. Scott Thompson's got problems brewing with the State Bar Association. My pulse spiked. What kind of problems? Word is, they're investigating his handling of contractor payments on the Mitchell case. 3 subcontractors filed complaints about non-payment last month. Thompson collected fees from his client, but never distributed payments to the trades. Classic trust account violation if they can prove it. I sat down my coffee, mind calculating the implications. How serious? Serious enough that the Bar Association scheduled a hearing for next week. Gary paused. Thompson's scrambling to find $23,000 to make the subcontractors whole before the investigation concludes. $23,000, the exact amount Scott owed, according to my earlier research. Gary, would those subcontractors be willing to discuss their experience with Thompson if someone from the construction community reached out? Absolutely. These guys are furious. Thompson promised payment for 6 months, always had excuses. I spent the next 3 hours making strategic phone calls. Bob Martinez owed $7,400. Steve Chen owed $9,200. Randy Foster still waiting for $6,500. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Professional courtesy calls from Donovan Builders checking references before potentially hiring Scott for legal services. Each contractor was eager to share warnings about Scott's payment practices and ethical shortcuts. By 1 p.m., I had documented evidence of Scott's systematic pattern of using client trust accounts as personal banking, violating state bar regulations. At 2:30 p.m., I called the State Bar Association's ethical complaint hotline. I'd like to file a formal complaint about attorney misconduct, I told the intake specialist. Daniel Thompson has engaged in a pattern of client trust account violations and has made misleading representations to construction industry professionals. The complaint form asked for detailed documentation. I provided contractor names, amounts owed, and evidence of Scott's systematic abuse of client funds. 3 additional contractors agreed to serve as witnesses. By 4 p.m., Scott's law office was receiving calls about expedited investigation procedures and mandatory hearing attendance. His professional reputation, the foundation of his conspiracy against me, was now under formal ethical review. At 4:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Frank Ramirez. Thompson just left his office carrying 3 boxes of files, heading toward his car. Want me to follow? No need, I typed back. I know exactly where he's going. Scott would be driving straight to Vivian, panic overriding his usual caution. The conspiracy that had begun with confidence and careful planning was about to become a desperate scramble for survival. 2 days of professional crisis had given Aurora time to process everything she'd learned. The drive to Donovan Builders headquarters felt like traveling toward a reckoning she'd been avoiding her entire adult life. My office building stood solid against the October sky. Brick and steel and honest workmanship. Everything Scott's glass tower pretended to be, but wasn't. I stood when she entered, reading her body language. Professional posture, clinical distance, the bearing of someone who'd made difficult decisions. "Dad, we need to discuss what's happening between you and Mom," she said. Her voice held the careful neutrality she used with troubled patients. "I've spent 2 days analyzing the situation, and I need to understand your perspective. What's your mother told you?" "That you're exhibiting controlling behaviors, financial manipulation, possible emotional abuse." She sat across from my desk, hands folded precisely. She wants me to support her victim narrative using my professional credentials. The clinical language was jarring, but I recognized her strategy: distance herself emotionally to evaluate facts objectively. "And what do you think?" "I think Mom tried to manipulate me the same way she's apparently been manipulating you." Aurora's green eyes, so much like Vivian's but clearer somehow, studied my face. "Show me the evidence, Dad." "I need to hear what you heard." I hesitated. Once I played that recording, there would be no protecting her from the truth about her mother and husband. But Aurora was a licensed psychologist, capable of handling reality. I pressed play on my phone. Vivian's voice filled the office. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." Aurora's expression didn't change for the first minute. Professional detachment held as she listened to her mother mock 25 years of marriage. She absorbed Scott's cold calculation of legal strategies and their plan for asset division. But when Vivian said 25 years of playing the devoted wife, Aurora's composure cracked slightly. Her hands clenched once, then relaxed. The recording ended. Silence stretched between us. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. 6 days. I overheard this conversation at your house last Tuesday." "And you've been what?" "Building a defense strategy while pretending everything was normal?" "Something like that." She leaned back in her chair, processing. "Mom asked me to evaluate your mental state. She wanted me to provide professional opinion that you were exhibiting abusive patterns." "What did you tell her?" "That I couldn't ethically assess someone without proper evaluation. That her claims seemed inconsistent with your established behavioral patterns." Aurora's voice carried a note of anger now. "She tried to use my training as a weapon, Dad, against you and against professional standards." The weight of betrayal, not just mine, but hers, settled between us. "I'm sorry you've been dragged into this, sweetheart." "I'm not." Her tone sharpened with resolve. "I'm glad I know the truth. The question is, what happens now?" "That's your choice, Aurora. I won't ask you to choose sides." "I already have." She stood up. "Decision made. I choose truth over family loyalty. I choose evidence over emotion, and I choose to support the parent who didn't try to manipulate my professional ethics." Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by concern. "What about Scott?" "What about him?" Her voice went cold. My husband participated in a conspiracy to financially destroy my father while using my psychology practice as cover. That marriage is over. I'm not making this decision in anger, she said, cutting off my protest. I'm making it based on character assessment and behavioral evidence. She moved toward the door, then paused. I'll testify honestly about family dynamics if needed, but I won't be anyone's weapon, including yours. I understand. Good, because there's one more thing I need to do. She left my office with the determined stride of someone who'd found moral clarity. 20 minutes later, she'd be walking into her own home to confront the man who'd betrayed not just me, but the professional ethics she'd spent years building. I sat alone in my office, surrounded by the evidence of 35 years of honest work, and felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began. Hope that truth might actually matter. Aurora's key turned in the lock at 7:30 p.m., and Scott's startled expression revealed he hadn't expected her home early. He sprawled on the living room couch, legal documents scattered across the coffee table, a half-empty whiskey bottle within reach. "We need to talk," Aurora announced, setting her purse down with deliberate precision. "Rough day," Scott muttered, not looking up from whatever case file he was pretending to review. The Barrett deposition got postponed again. "I know about the conspiracy, Scott." His head snapped up. The careful lawyer's mask slipped, revealing something desperate underneath. "What conspiracy?" "The one where you and my mother planned to financially destroy my father while using my psychology credentials to support false abuse allegations." Aurora remained standing, maintaining advantage. "I heard the recording, every word." He sat down his whiskey glass with exaggerated calm. "Aurora, I think you're misunderstanding. 25 years of playing the devoted wife." Aurora's voice was steady. "Sound familiar?" The color drained from his face. Scott Thompson, who could argue cases before the state Supreme Court, suddenly looked like a man watching his world collapse. "How much did you hear?" "Everything. Asset division strategy, timeline, your fee calculation, mom's performance reviews." Aurora sat across from him, maintaining professional distance. Was our entire marriage part of this plan? 3 days later, Vivian discovered that social destruction moved faster than legal proceedings. The Lakeside Cliffs dining room buzzed with Saturday brunch conversation, but clusters of women fell silent as she approached their tables. Linda Patterson, her bridge partner for 5 years, became fascinated by her Eggs Benedict when Vivian stopped to say hello. Susan Morrison claimed an urgent phone call rather than continue their conversation. By the time Vivian reached her usual table, she understood that the conspiracy had become public knowledge. "Vivian, dear," Janet Crawford's voice carried false sweetness. "We missed you at the planning committee meeting yesterday." "What meeting? I wasn't informed." "Oh, didn't you get the message? We had to make some organizational changes, you understand?" Vivian was beginning to recognize the pattern. Phone calls not returned, invitations rescinded, social doors closing with whispered efficiency. Meanwhile, I conducted my own campaign with considerably more success. 35 years of honest dealing had earned me credibility that no legal maneuvering could destroy. My lunch with Bill Foster at the bank proved strategically productive. I shared concerns about family difficulties with just enough detail to establish facts without appearing vindictive. Vivian and our son-in-law apparently developed concerning plans regarding our assets, I mentioned over coffee. I've had to implement protective measures. Bill's response was exactly what I'd hoped for. Professional understanding mixed with personal sympathy for a friend dealing with family betrayal. The Chamber of Commerce board meeting that evening proved equally valuable. When Gary Stone asked about Vivian's absence from the recent fundraising dinner, I explained with genuine sadness about marriage difficulties that had come to light. "Sometimes you discover people aren't who you thought they were," I said, allowing disappointment to show. "I'm grateful I found out when I did." By Sunday evening, Vivian's social isolation was complete. The country club membership committee scheduled a routine review of her status. The charity board accepted her resignation from positions she'd never submitted. Scott's professional collapse accelerated alongside Vivian's social exile. 3 major clients terminated relationships, citing concerns about judgment and ethical standards. The Miller Industries account, worth $200,000 annually, sent a formal letter expressing loss of confidence. Vivian's frantic Sunday night call to Scott carried desperation I could hear through their apartment's thin walls. "Everyone knows Scott, everyone. I can't show my face anywhere in this town. We'll file emergency motions Monday morning. Force Donovan into a defensive position." Before what? Before you lose your law license? Before I move back to my sister's house in Minnesota? Their mutual recrimination session lasted until midnight. 2 conspirators discovering that shared guilt wasn't the same as shared solutions. Tomorrow would bring their last desperate gambit. I was ready. Monday morning found Vivian in Brenda Carter's downtown office, a divorce attorney whose reputation for scorched earth tactics had earned her both notoriety and high fees. The glass conference room overlooked the courthouse where Vivian hoped to destroy me, but the lawyer's expression suggested limited optimism. "Mrs. Donovan, I've reviewed your materials." Brenda's voice carried professional skepticism. "Your husband's financial protective measures appear legally sound. Joint account holders have rights to restrict access during marital discord. But it's financial abuse." Vivian's desperation leaked through her victim persona. "He's controlling every aspect of my access to money we earned together." "Money he earned according to tax records spanning 25 years, Brenda countered. "Your income contributions appear minimal. You haven't been employed outside the home since 1989. Homemaker status had once represented luxury. Now it looked like evidence of dependency. What about emotional abuse, intimidation tactics? What specific incidents can you document?" The question hung in the air. Vivian had spent sleepless nights trying to construct believable abuse patterns from 25 years of my genuine consideration and generosity. "Can you provide examples of threats, physical intimidation, isolation from family or friends?" Brenda pressed. "Well, no, but—" "Mrs. Donovan, domestic abuse cases require evidence." Each question struck holes in Vivian's fabricated narrative. I had never raised my voice in anger or restricted her activities. 10 blocks away, Scott discovered that bar association investigations moved with bureaucratic efficiency when they wanted answers. Monday morning's ethics committee call carried implications beyond contractor payment delays. "Mr. Thompson, we've received additional complaints regarding your handling of client trust accounts, specifically allegations that you've been using client funds for personal expenses pending case resolution." Scott's hand tightened on the phone. "Those allegations are unfounded. I've always maintained proper accounting. We have documentation showing invoices submitted 8 months ago with promises of payment pending client approval." The bar representative was relentless. "Yet your client settled 6 months ago. Where are those funds currently?" The answer was his personal checking account, where contractor payments had been diverted to cover office rent and $180,000 in student loans. What had seemed like resourceful cash flow management now appeared as embezzlement. "We're scheduling a formal hearing for Thursday morning," the representative stated. "You'll need complete financial records for all client accounts dating back 18 months. By Wednesday evening, Vivian and Scott had reached the desperation that breeds dangerous decisions. Their emergency strategy session in Scott's nearly empty office felt like generals planning a final assault with no ammunition. "We have to file domestic violence claims," Vivian announced with false confidence. "It's the only way to force him into a defensive position." "Vivian, false domestic violence allegations are felony charges if we're caught, given the evidence he probably has," Scott warned. "What evidence? I've never said anything in front of cameras or witnesses that would contradict—" She stopped, remembering the recording that started this cascade. "The recording proves we were planning financial strategy, not documenting his abuse. So, we reframe it. Your legal expertise, my victim testimony. Make the narrative about long-term emotional manipulation and financial control." Scott stared at her across the conference table. 6 months ago, she'd been a bored housewife seeking excitement. Now she was proposing perjury in federal court. If this fails, we're both facing criminal charges. "If we don't try, I'm facing poverty and you're facing disbarment anyway," Vivian shot back. "At least this way we go down fighting." Thursday morning's restraining order hearing would determine whether their Hail Mary succeeded or whether they'd simply provided me with more conspiracy evidence. Neither realized their opponent had spent the entire week documenting every phone call, every desperate meeting, every lie they'd told to lawyers and friends. Donovan Cole wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was building a prosecution case. The courthouse felt different on November 1st, as if 35 years of honest reputation had crystallized into something tangible I could carry into battle. Judge Diana Hayes presided over domestic relations court with no-nonsense efficiency. Vivian sat at the plaintiff's table with Brenda Carter, wearing the carefully chosen outfit of a battered wife. "Mrs. Donovan," Judge Hayes began, reviewing the emergency restraining order petition, "you allege your husband has engaged in financial abuse and intimidation. Can you describe specific incidents that led you to fear for your safety?" Vivian's voice trembled with practiced vulnerability. "Your Honor, for months my husband has been restricting my access to our accounts, monitoring my spending, making threats about what would happen if I tried to leave." "What kind of threats, Mrs. Donovan?" "Financial threats, that I'd be left with nothing, that he'd use his business connections to destroy my reputation." Vivian paused for effect. "Last week, he completely cut off my access to money, even for basic necessities." I watched my wife of 25 years perjure herself with increasing confidence. Each lie built upon the previous one, creating fictional abuse from a man who'd spent decades providing every comfort she'd demanded. Judge Hayes turned to my attorney, James Morrison. "Does the defendant wish to respond?" James stood with calm authority. "Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Donovan's claims are not only false, but part of a deliberate conspiracy to defraud the defendant of marital assets." "That's a serious allegation, Counselor. We have audio recording of Mrs. Donovan and her co-conspirator Daniel Thompson planning this exact scenario 6 weeks ago." Vivian's face went white. Brenda Carter whispered frantically in her client's ear, "But damage control was impossible when your entire case was built on lies." "I'd like to present Exhibit A," James continued, connecting his phone to the courtroom's audio system. Vivian's voice filled the chamber. "When the old fool finally signs the papers, we'll have everything we planned for." For 43 minutes, Judge Hayes listened to the complete conspiracy unfold. Vivian's mockery of our marriage, Scott's legal strategies, their calculated plan to manipulate Aurora's psychology credentials. "The man actually believes I love him," Vivian's recorded voice declared with casual cruelty. Judge Hayes stopped the recording. "Mrs. Donovan, do you have any response to this evidence?" Vivian's mouth opened and closed silently. Brenda Carter's face had gone pale as she realized her client had used her to file fraudulent court documents. "Your Honor," Brenda said carefully, "I request permission to withdraw from this case. I was not informed of these circumstances when I agreed to representation." Motion granted. Judge Hayes fixed Vivian with the stare she reserved for perjurers. "Mrs. Donovan, I'm dismissing your restraining order petition with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of possible perjury charges." The gavel fell with a finality that echoed through the courtroom. 2 weeks later, the divorce settlement reflected Vivian's spectacular miscalculation. Her documented deception eliminated any claim to spousal support, and the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten limited her to minimal asset division. Scott's law license suspension became permanent revocation when the Bar Association discovered $127,000 in missing client funds. Last I heard, he'd moved and was working as a paralegal. Aurora filed for divorce the day after the hearing. She's building a new practice focused on family therapy with particular expertise in recognizing manipulation patterns. 6 months later, Vivian works retail at the same mall where she once spent my money on luxury items. The irony isn't lost on either of us. I rebuilt Donovan Builder's reputation stronger than before. The community's support during my family difficulties translated into new contracts and deeper business relationships. The house feels different now, quieter but honest. No more performed conversations or calculated affection. Just the sound of rain on windows I built with my own hands in a home that's finally mine again. Vivian had been right about one thing. I really had believed she loved me. Now I know the difference between love and performance. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you are here.